Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. My name is Hassani. It is good to have each and every one of you here with me this morning, wherever you may be dialing in from around the world. We want to know who you are so that we can acknowledge you. This is going to be an important conversation today, because if there is a topic that I get phone calls about from people around the world, I don't care if it's on the continent of Africa, if it's Europe, if it's the Middle East, the Caribbean, Latin America, and all throughout the United States, it's this topic: when infidelity leads to pregnancy. I've heard it all. I've seen it all. We've helped couples overcome the challenges of what happens when there is a child out of wedlock as a result of a betrayal. So we're going to dive deep into that conversation and give you what you need in terms of strategy to make it through. But before we go there, listen, guys, just so you know, there is a last chance weekend coming up. That's right. It is going to be February the 21st through the 23rd. We're just about 5 weeks away. This is one you do not want to miss. Every time we do it in February, it is a special one. It is one of the largest ones. You want to get in there. Some of you like going through a recovery process where you have other couples who are part of that process that you can learn from, that you can glean from, that you can get support from. And so this is your opportunity. As we used to do in the past, we're going to start sharing testimonials of couples who've been through it. So watch this, and after this, we'll get started with today's show.
Hi, we are Ryan and Marcy Fowler. We're from Zeeland, Holland, Michigan. We also are from Florida. What we got out of this weekend what I personally got out of this weekend was absolutely amazing. I'm going to say probably the best 3 days we have ever spent together, probably 3 of the toughest days, and 3 of the most productive days that we have ever had. Probably the best investment we have ever made in each other, personally and together as a couple.
Yeah, it was a crapshoot. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. We decided to take the leap of faith that this would change our lives. We, even on the way here, we're like, we have no idea what's going to happen, and it's mind-blowing how changing this weekend was. It was incredibly difficult, but incredibly awesome, and no pain, no gain. I couldn't recommend it more to any couple that needs to be affirmed and to know where they're going. And our last name is going to live forever.
Absolutely.
Amazing couple who has done amazing work. Not only have they recovered in their relationship, but they have become trained to help other couples who are going through challenges as well. And that's what Couples Academy is all about: helping you get to a better place so that you can tap into the purpose and the power of your partnership. All right, guys, we're talking about infidelity and how it leads to pregnancy. This is a very complex situation, and we've been involved in this process from a few different perspectives. So let me just give you a few scenarios to consider. There are those of you who just found out that your spouse has had an affair and the other woman is pregnant. There are those of you who have found out that your spouse has had an affair and your spouse is pregnant. That's a challenging thing to deal with, whichever of those two scenarios exists, because depending upon how long they've been pregnant, it is a waiting game, right? Because one of the questions is, well, is this our child or is this the other's child? Like, so many questions come into play. And so even though you have a good sense and an understanding of what took place, there's nothing like the birth of that child and the finality of it, that the child is here. So whether a person is a month pregnant or 9 months pregnant, every single moment until that child is born is a waiting period, and it's a challenging moment. And oftentimes a moment can seem like an eternity. And during this phase, it can be a very volatile phase. Now, that's one scenario. But then there's another scenario where couples reach out to us after a child has already been born. So maybe that child is a few few months old. Maybe that child is a few years old and they're struggling with how to navigate through this, because now this child is a constant reminder of the betrayal that their spouse has been involved in. And so how do we deal with that moving forward? Then there's another scenario where an affair took place, whether I'm aware of it or not. But years down the line, all of a sudden, a knock comes on the door, or a phone call, or a text message, or an email. And now you are faced with the reality of a child that you had from a previous betrayal that you were not aware of, or you weren't aware that there was a child. And now that child is 15, 18, 23 years old, and you're faced with that reality, and how do you deal with it as a couple? And so oftentimes you have different scenarios that play themselves out. Now, if this is not your situation, it is so easy to say, if that ever happened to me, I would leave, I would be out, I'm done. But interestingly enough, 99% of the couples who call who experience this don't necessarily have that position. They're trying to figure out, how do we deal with this? How do we overcome this? How do we move forward in the midst of this challenge? Because it wasn't just an affair. It's an affair that ended with a child. Does that make sense? So it can be perceived as death by 1,000 cuts, because the way that I recover and heal from this is altogether different, because now there's a permanent fixture, a permanent person, a permanent reality that we have to deal with as a couple. And so I don't want you to come from a place of judgment. I want you to come from a place of empathy and understanding. And if you find yourself in this situation, you've come to the right episode here at the Couples Academy Show, because we're going to guide you through some very, very powerful things. But before we do that, because I know there's a lot to get through, we want to go to a quick commercial break to explain to you that this is what we do. People watch our show every single day and don't realize that we are in the business of helping and to restore relationships as professionals. So watch this and we'll be right back. Also, I just want to let you know before we dive in that Danielle has a major event coming up February the 1st. It is the Find Your Spark webinar. So if you are a wife and you're ready to take your life to the next level, make sure you click the link in the description, sign up for that, because it's going to be amazing. All right, let's step into these points. The first thing I want to talk to you about, if you find yourself in a situation, maybe that child has just recently been born or about to be born, and you want to know how to strategically plan for this. The first thing, you've got to decide on the role of the child in your life. Now, there's three individuals. We call this the triangle. You're dealing with, let's just say your spouse is the unfaithful partner who had the affair. Okay, so what role does that child have in your spouse's life? That's something that needs to be discovered and needs to be unpacked and needs to be planned through, because these open conversations can be very painful. And initially, we respond emotionally, but at the end of the day, there's a child here, okay? And so we need to discuss what that looks like. But also, as the betrayed spouse, what role will I have with this child? Do I want to be involved with this child? Do I want to play a co-parenting role with this child? And then the other question is, well, what role and what access does the affair partner have, with that child? Because that affair partner is a biological parent. And so it's very tricky, because it means that affair partner, the biological parent, will always, in some respects, to some degree, be in your lives as a couple, because there's going to have to be communication, negotiation. There's going to be a lot that you two are going to have to sort through in the initial stages to establish a strategic plan that serves all parties best. But most importantly, what serves that child. And so part of the conversation is establishing clear boundaries. Now, the biological parent of the child who's in the marriage, the one who was unfaithful, may have obviously a love for that child because it is their biological child. And that can oftentimes make the spouse feel some type of way because now attention and effort and affection and finances are going to this child that was created outside of the realm of our marriage. And now the spouse, the betrayed spouse, can feel some type of way because now the things that should have naturally been coming into the home are now going out of the home. The time that you should have been spending with our children, you're now spending it with another child. The resources that should be invested in this marriage are now going to another child. So it can be a very difficult season and situation if you two are not on the same page. And this is why we find it so important that you work with somebody that can help you navigate through this, because all of you have a different emotional experience and emotional relationship with the child in the circumstances that you find yourself in. And so we see oftentimes that there's this tug of war where the betrayed spouse puts demands and restrictions on their former unfaithful spouse, who's the parent of the child. And some of those restrictions can be unrealistic and impractical and can lead to more problems and consequences. And so this is why you have to have a cool head and a cool heart and somebody to guide you through that process. Now, one of the challenges that typically will take place is, let's just say the husband was unfaithful. He gets another woman pregnant. That other woman has that child, but now the mother of the child doesn't respect the wife. The mother of the child doesn't want the wife around her child, right? As if she can have that level of control because both of them share this child. And now we have aught and unforgiveness and resentment, bitterness, and tension between the affair partner and the spouse. And now the child gets kind of caught in the middle of this fight and this feud that's taking place, and it doesn't serve the child at all. And then you have other situations where the unfaithful spouse, who's the biological parent of the child, has communication with the former affair partner. Now, interestingly enough, this gentleman is married. And so rather than bringing conversations to the wife, he's having separate conversations with the affair partner about their child, which can be very triggering to the spouse. So now their conversations are solo and separate, as opposed to having shared conversations. Now, oftentimes we help couples navigate through this to say that if there's going to be any communication between the former unfaithful spouse and the former affair partner, it needs to be in a group type of communication, text or phone or messaging platform, so that the spouse, the betrayed spouse, can feel comfortable about what these conversations and interactions are like. But oftentimes now that is a problem that has to be navigated. And so if we're going to do what's best for the child, the spouse has to be involved in every decision. The spouse has to be involved in every visitation. The spouse has to be involved in every doctor's checkup. The spouse has to be involved in the financial decisions. But if a spouse doesn't want to, because some spouses like to stick their head in the sand and would just wish it would go away, they don't want any involvement at all, that can cause further problems, because any interaction that the parent has with the child now becomes another form of betrayal. And so this is why getting the help for the primary relationship between the husband and the wife is so critically important, because if they're not in alignment, if they're not on the same page, if they are not finding healing, it is going to be a problem when it comes to parenting that child. So there's a lot of things that we have to consider here when dealing with a child out of the bounds of the marriage. It's important that you have to understand that the family dynamics have to be adjusted and have to be changed. Because there's only so long that you can keep this information away from the rest of the family. So if there are biological children who are of a certain age and a spouse went out and had an affair and got another woman pregnant and now there's a child, at what point do we introduce that child into the life of the family? See, every situation is different. So if I give you general principles and you apply them the wrong way because your situation is uniquely different, it may impact your family in a negative way and another family in a positive way. But see, there has to be a coming of terms. There has to be a conversation. There has to be a family meeting, because you have to understand, when you cheat on your spouse in this situation, you're actually cheating on the family, because the children are affected. In-laws are affected. The community is affected. And so we have been a part of conversations where we had to have family interventions, where we brought every member of the family together and prepped and prepared the former unfaithful spouse who has this child to introduce this news to the family. You can imagine a shock. You can imagine the emotional turmoil that took place in that household. And to have somebody there to properly navigate through that was critically important. Robert Stinton says that transparency is everything. And that's absolutely right. And one of the challenges with revealing an affair, there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of guilt associated with that. And oftentimes we engage in the trickle truth. We tell people what we want them to hear based upon what we think that they can handle. And so pieces of truth come out little by little by little, which makes this process extremely painful. And because of that, here we have a new bit of information, a new bone just fell out the closet, a new skeleton, a new situation, and it can cause further fury, turmoil, and disconnect amongst the family members. And we've seen families, unfortunately, break down. We've seen people literally in relationships with family members because of a child that is born that wasn't handled properly. And so one of the things that we have to deal with not only is how we're going to manage the child as the child is young, but what is the long-term plan of this child? At some point, there's got to be acceptance amongst the spouse and the family if the spouse chooses to stay in the relationship. For years to go by, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and still mad and still bitter is not helping you, is not helping the spouse, is not helping the family dynamic, and is certainly not helping the child. We have seen where the spouse has hatred and vitriol and disdain towards the child, right? So it is an emotion that is misdirected toward the child, and now the child feels it. And so now as that child grows up, there's all types of insecurities and inadequacies and anxieties that they're dealing with, their self-image, their fear of rejection and abandonment. All those things begin to creep up because the parents haven't dealt with this effectively. So there's got to be a long-term plan for the emotional health of every member of the family. There's got to be a long-term plan for how we integrate this child into the family, if that is the plan. Some people say, I don't want you involved, just send a check and be done with it. Well, that creates a problem if a couple is not on the same page. And so obviously, if you have a child, money is not enough because a part of that child's identity is wrapped up in that parent. So you can imagine the level of complexities that are involved in this situation and why you need somebody to help you navigate through these situations. So maybe this is you. Maybe you find yourself in this situation. Maybe you've been struggling for quite some time, not knowing how to broach the topic, how to deal with it. Maybe it's causing all types of anxiety and constant triggers for a spouse. Now, you talk about, I now have to think about what you did 5 years ago that I'm still triggered by. But when there's a child involved, I don't have to think about 5 years ago. I'm living in my trigger and I'm living in my pain every single day, because when the child name comes up, when there's a picture of the child, when the child comes over for visitations, I am triggered if I haven't taken the time to embrace this accept this, find healing in this, and figure out how to navigate through this. Now, when we say acceptance, we are not saying accept the fact that it's okay, accept that it's no big deal, because none of those things would be true. But it's accepting that this is your current reality. And the more you begin to enter into an acceptance of this is what it is, now what do I do about it? You can get back to a place where there's a sense of normalcy in the home. Even though we're doing life different, we can gain a normalcy in this new walk of life that we have together as a couple. Now, one of the other things that we have to consider is the fact that there have to be boundaries put in place. Because if there was a level of freedom that a spouse had prior to the betrayal and prior to the birth of the child, we have to begin to do life new and different. One of the challenges I find is that a betrayed spouse says, I don't want to become that person. I don't want to be the person controlling my man and always in his phone and navigating and facilitating and helicoptering and looking out and being over his shoulder, whether it's a man to a woman or a woman to a man. I don't want to become that spouse. I don't want to be looking through their phone. I don't want to. But the reality is, because this has happened, you have to choose to do life completely different. There has to be a system of accountability. Because there has been a violation of trust, we now have to put checks and balances in place in order to ensure that a person is operating in integrity. So because of this new reality that you're facing, you have to begin to do the relationship differently. Most people come to us because they're guilty of doing marriage wrong. Now you have to learn how to do it right. So if you're the person who says, well, I've always just blindly trusted, well, guess what? Your trust can't be blind anymore. You can trust, but you should verify. You see? So there's a different way, a different method, a different process, a different way that you have to operate in the relationship to ensure that this never happens again. For why would you sign up to continue to be in a relationship if your spouse was the same? See, you don't want your spouse to be the same. You want your spouse to be different, but yet you're still committed to being the same. And neither of you can be the same. Both of you have to become different if this thing is going to work. So these are some of the challenges and the struggles that people have when a child comes into their lives. The next thing, we have to decide on what level of relationship you want with that child. This is critically important. And this is where couples oftentimes debate back and forth, the level of involvement. See, I've seen some miraculous things happen where a spouse couldn't get pregnant, right? And so their partner wasn't faithful. There was a child. Now, I've seen this go two ways. It could be extremely triggering because, wow, you went and had an affair and produced a child in this affair relationship, and we've attempted to have a child for all these years and couldn't have a child. So I'm constantly triggered. I'm in a deeper level of pain because now you have with someone else what we were never able to have. Could you imagine? Could you imagine that? But I've seen the flip side of that. I've seen some people look at this as a blessing. Now, obviously the circumstances aren't well, but they were able to see, well, this is the reality that we find ourselves in. And now, if this child is going to be a part of our lives, I'm going to shift my mindset and embrace this child and have a relationship with this child, because there would have never been a relationship with any child because as a couple, we could not have one. So it sometimes is not what happens to you, but it's how you respond to it. Now, some of you are listening saying, that is crazy. I can't believe that anybody would ever want that. But you have to understand that everybody's situation is different. Everybody's relational dynamic is different. Everybody's personal struggle and journey is different. And so what works for one couple is different than what will work for another couple. And this is why it's important that as a couple, you two are on the same page to figure out what works for you. But many of you are in the midst of this struggle right now. And so as we close this show, and we're going to talk more about this and get into the weeds of this, I need you to reach out to us at 678-200-8996. Go to the website, set up a discovery call, because we want to help you overcome the struggle that you're currently going through. The affair is one thing, but then there is the aftermath of the affair. And so for some people, it may be an STD. For other people, it could be a pregnancy. And then for all who've experienced a pregnancy, how do we begin to do life together in a different way that allows us to find healing, wholeness, restoration with this new child? Listen, guys, you're watching the Couples Academy show. My name is Hassani Pettiford. I hope that this was helpful and gave you something that you need. But in the meantime, reach out to us and let's see how we can support you. Love you all. There's nothing you can do about it. And we'll see you tomorrow morning.